Hey Raghunath, tell everyone about our Patreon community.
Sure, Kaustubha. The Wisdom of the Sages Patreon community is an incredible online yoga resource. If you like the type of yoga wisdom and culture we share on the show, then our Patreon community is a great next step. This is a listener-supported podcast, and any level of sponsorship will unlock a wide range of live and archived classes, talks, and even workshops.
Raghunath teaches, I teach, and we have a host of other excellent teachers on topics ranging from yoga philosophy, asana classes, storytelling, Ayurveda, kirtan, cooking, meditation, and a lot more.
We even have an incredible online Bhakti 12-step recovery group.
So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/wisdom of the sages.
All right, let's get it on.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Live from Super Soul Farm, this is Wisdom of the Sages, a daily yoga podcast with your host, Raghunath, and co-host and senior educator at the Bhakti Center in New York City, Kaustubha Das. Welcome to the show, and welcome to...
We don't have a name for it. Sleeping Sunday?
We're sleeping Sunday, but it's interview day, where we get very exciting people that have lived sort of interesting lives, and we pick their brain, find out what makes them tick. And this week, we have our very own Kaustubha Das. We're going to ask questions to Kaustubha, and I have a bunch of questions, and some people wrote in some questions. If you have some questions and you're listening live on Zoom, you can write them to Mara right now.
Are these are you going to just drill me with difficult hot seat questions?
Yeah, I'm just going to give you verses to quote from the Upanishads and see if you get them.
This is going to be like your revenge day of all time, right? For every time I put you on the hot seat, you're going to get me right now.
No, I actually want to figure out what makes Kaustubha. I've known him for a while, but sometimes you don't know something about a person until you boom, 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 boom. You know, you sort of get under and you probe a little bit like that. So we'd like to, and you're not supposed to ask about a devotee's past. It's considered done. And you are what you are now.
Okay.
That being said.
That's what we're going to be doing today.
That being said, you know, me and Kaustubha, we didn't officially know each other in our teenage life, but we both sort of like took the Metro North, we took the Metro North train from the suburbs, the Harlem line. I lived in Connecticut, and so it was very close to New York State. And we took the same train to New York City.
We never bumped into each other on the train.
The thing is, we might have bumped into each other. You know, we
would have known, because if you were into hardcore and I was into hardcore and we saw each other, we would have said hello.
No, you know what? I was a little shy.
Really?
I considered everybody in the hardcore scene insane back then. I was 15 years old, and I was like, it was intimidating. I'd go up from Connecticut to my very normal life, and then I'd meet a bunch of nutcases, you know, in that scene. Everybody looked like a crazy, insane derelict. Everybody was huffing glue. Now, Aditi, Aravind, let me just share with you what people do for fun. They take model glue that you build airplane models with, and they put the glue in a bag, and they put the bag over their mouth like a feed bag, and they inhale that until their brain goes pow. That's what everyone did. I never did that.
Not everyone. Few people.
Come on, did you do that?
Never.
Okay, you don't have to say stuff if you did do it. I'm going to take that as yes, you did do that.
Okay.
But it's so I was always like a little freaked out, and I didn't do drugs, and I didn't smoke, and I was into healthy thing. So I sort of just like bounced around and tried desperately not to get my ass kicked, because they were handing out ass kickings for no good reason. That's what the punk scene was like back then. They're just handing them out. And so it was like going to the Wild West. So I remember seeing your face. And
we would see each other, and we were both living in the city too, so at a certain point. So
Yeah, at a certain point, we just started we just stopped. We was going back to Connecticut and start hanging out there. And a matter of fact, the other day when Mike D from the Beastie Boys was on the show, we brought up a couple of shows, and we are like, "Oh, I was at that show. I was at that show too."
yeah,
I
well,
even
there
got a
must have been
funny,
many.
I even got a funny text message from Perry, who's one of our others, but Perry always comes to Indy with us, and he said that he was at the Haircut 100 show.
Okay.
But anyway, so how did you go from walking the streets of New York and hanging out with the crazy crew to sort of like, I want to be an Orthodox Hindu monk? What was that little, and that was part one of the questions. Part two of the question is, how did we ever meet? How did we actually officially shake hands one day? Hello, good to meet you. How'd
Well,
that
I'll
go?
answer the second one first. I think, like we were saying, I had a group of friends. You had a group of friends,
Yeah.
right? They're both related to the hardcore scene, but they're different groups, but there's a lot of overlap. And I got into hardcore around 81. That's when I first started hanging in the city, and especially 82. And, but by 84, I was, although hanging out with a lot of those same people and hanging out in the same places with those people, I was,
I think Kaustubha, we have
yeah,
to rewind it because there's a lot of civilians out there.
okay.
I'm looking at the faces who may not even know what hardcore is.
Oh,
Hardcore is a very peculiar subculture of music. Back when everyone was listening to Cheap Trick and AC/DC and arena rock bands, there was a few dirtbags like ourselves that were saying, I'm not interested in this music. I'm going to hang out in the grossest part of America on the most dangerous street corners, and we're going to make our own music. And we're going to risk our very life to make that music and listen to that music by other disenfranchised teenagers. And the hub of that was like CBGB's in New York City. And this was 1981, 1982.
and you could
Please
also
go.
say, okay,
Yeah,
and
go.
thank you.
Please go.
And the broader context was the city itself was pretty wild at the time. So what to speak of the Lower East Side was super wild at that time. And you could also say that the hub of the New York hardcore scene was also around Tompkins Square Park, right? Avenue A, St. Mark's Place, and the Club A7 on the corner of Avenue A and 7th Street. And so I was hanging out with kids from that scene and some very influential kids in that scene. And it so happened that, and this is, we kind of went through this before we became Wisdom and Sages. I told this whole story, so I'll go into some of that again. But Tompkins Square Park, of course, is where Srila Prabhupada brought Bhakti to the Western world in 1966. Right?
Unbelievable, isn't it?
That he would, with a few, I don't know if you want to call them beatnik followers,
Beatnik.
hippie, whatever, would, not really hippie even then. I think even beatnik is probably more, on it. But they would take a little bongo drum and go out, and maybe Prabhupada might have had a pair of cartels, or they might have one or two pair of cartels. And Prabhupada would do kirtan in Tompkins Square Park. And so you could say that's the birth of the Sankirtan movement. In a sense, the birth, I would say, is the birth of the Bhakti movement in the Western world. And you're muted, so I can't hear you, Raghu, if you're talking to me. And so it was that my faith is that when a unique, super rare, historic, saint like that does something like that, that place becomes special, right? That place becomes a holy place. And I see it that way. And I still regularly go there, like in a mood like that. I visit that tree under which he did the kirtan, and I circumambulate, and just like I would in a holy place in India, I think of that place that way. So I say all that to give the background that somehow we were all, hanging out in that area, which at the time was a very dangerous, very wild, dirty, place.
Kaustubji, I'm trying to think, like, that park was dangerous when we were there. And I remember at the corner of Avenue A and 7th Street on that club called A7, there was
Yeah.
spray painted on the wall, out of town bands, realize where you are. It was just like sort of like the most
Sign.
unwelcoming, like sort of fear instilling messages when you pull up to this area. Now, if you go to Avenue A, it's quite charming. It's incredibly charming. The
Relatively.
park is charming, relatively charming.
Yeah.
But in 81, I mean, you guys got to watch the movie Serpico, which I just rented. New York was, all the police officers were corrupt.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine what it was like in 1966. But
You know,
Prabhupada went to that park.
I'm sure it was similar, but I think 70s and 80s, the city really started to fall apart. And I think those years are probably its worst, you know. But in any case, my point is, my friends were in that scene, and so that being that holy place, devotees used to go there. They used to hang out on Avenue A at Tompkins Park and serve out prasadam, this, you know, sacred food. And their influence, you know, had always been in that neighborhood going back to 1965, 66, when Prabhupada, it was in 66 that he established himself there at 26 Second Avenue. So that influence was always there. And that influence seeped into the hardcore scene. And I think the original person was a person at the time, his name was Tomas, his name is Tamraparni now, he's a god brother of mine. And from him it spread to different people. Bhakti Louis is here, he was one of the very early people that got into it. John Joseph from the Crow Mass got into it. Jayanta, John Watson, who we were speaking about yesterday, and they're calling John Wallace. He was one of the very early people into it. And it spread more and more. Then a friend of mine who's also somewhat well known, Harley Flanagan. If more than anyone, my conversations with him, many conversations with Harley Flanagan. Yeah, many conversations with him over, I would say, the course of a year or so, that's really what got me interested. And that turned me on to Srila Prabhupada's books. And it was Srila Prabhupada's books that really changed the course of my life. But you asked, how do we meet? So I was hanging out with that group a lot. And you know, as I was getting out of hardcore, your band was rising in hardcore. And so you were kind of like, you know, starting a whole new wave within that scene. So we were passing through the same neighborhoods, and I had kind of, if I was still into hardcore, I probably would have stopped and gotten to know you and everything like that, because I was kind of getting out of hardcore. You know, we never did. But so I think the first time we really met was after I was a monk, and you became one too, if I remember correctly.
I'm trying to, I can't remember how we met.
I'm pretty sure.
But I know when we were in India a few years later, I had my first initiation where I got my name Raghunath. Yeah. And you had your second initiation where you got your Brahmin initiation. So I remember that, but we were already very close by then.
Yeah, so. It was that way long before then.
Maybe when we moved at one point to Washington, D.C. Maybe that's when we sort of really bonded.
Yeah, maybe. I think even before then.
We slept next to each other on the floor.
Yeah, I think
even before. We have been sleeping next to each other for years. We slept in India together on the floor, and traveling through Mayapur on the floor. Yeah. It's my prayer that I always sleep next to you. We always have very sweet conversations as we went off to sleep at night.
It's true.
Was it you know, Abir asked this question. Now Abir's from Bombay. He lives in a very probably I'm speculating, but a pretty traditional family, Indian family. And he says, and I have a similar question. I hope this finds you in good health and peace. Kaustubha, were you nervous when you first became a monk at an early age? And how did you deal with moving away from your family and friends for such a long period of time?
Well, I had already moved away from my family. You know, years before.
Up here, you gotta understand how we Americans work.
It's a different thing over here. Yeah, you know, my relationship with my family then was pretty rough. You know, and I take full responsibility for that. It's much better now. Everything's good now. But as a teenager, you know, that's another thing that people don't realize, that just to be into punk rock or hardcore back in the early '80s in America and to look the way that we looked. It was very hard for people to understand. So if your parents see you looking like that, and, you know, basically it was kind of a social suicide, you know, it's kind of like, I don't care about the world and they didn't care about you.
The only people that can relate to you are those people from that scene.
Yeah,
And
to a
therefore, when
large
you went
degree.
back to normal land, which was everywhere else, your high school, your community, your family, like what is your parents would just be constantly, what is wrong with you? Why do you have an earring? And not even a tattoo. It's like, why do you wear combat boots? Why do you walk around with a trench coat?
To have a shaved head or what to speak spiked hair, which I had at the time, all that stuff. It was very hard to understand. And that's why a neighborhood like the Lower East Side was like, everyone was a little crazy in one way or another. So it kind of fit into that place. I wasn't, it wasn't a question of leaving my family at the time. And I certainly wasn't nervous in any way about it. If anything, I was leaving a far more unstable, dangerous world by becoming a monk. But I remember, because I mentioned Harley, I had a group of friends. They were amongst those wild kids in that scene. They were among the wildest, and
Yep, they were.
legendary.
Legendarily wild.
And it was some of the guys in the Cro-Mags and in a very influential band called the Cro-Mags, and a group around them. And to this day, I'm very grateful, and I have really just fond feelings for all of those people, which is not an easy thing to do because they're often at like odds with each other. But I just, kind of like what I learned as a monk was to try to always see the good and try not to see the bad. And I see nothing but the good in those people, and I feel a really profound sense of gratitude to them, because however they did it, they introduced me to what really became my life. And I remember that the way that I became a monk was, we can go back, right? Through these friends, I began to read Srila Prabhupada's books, and that was in 1986. And I had attended a couple of programs at the same place you have mentioned earlier, the on Greenwich Avenue in the West Village. There used to be a little center there, and devotees used to do programs.
Which can I just jump in? Leslie Kaimanoff, who's a pretty famous yoga teacher right now.
Sure.
A lot of the yoga teachers know, but his wife ran this little devotee center. She's like an initiated Krishna devotee, and she ran this little center.
Her name was
Leela Avatar.
Leela Avatar.
Yeah, wonderful, super wonderful.
She was great, just a person just dedicated to serving and, intelligent and hard work. And that's how I perceived her.
Huge heart. And she basically, we all went there for kirtan, Bhagavad Gita, and vegetarian dinner.
Yeah, especially the vegetarian dinner.
3 days a week.
And so I attended a couple programs there, but it wasn't anything life-changing. But it was really Srila Prabhupada's books. Like I say, it was the talks with my friends, particularly Harley, on many park benches and stoops, on the Lower East Side, hanging out, perhaps, likely a bit intoxicated at the time, but just, philosophical questions about life, going back and forth. And it was through, I really just, to this day, with great appreciation and wonder, I'm amazed at how Srila Prabhupada was able to communicate a very foreign culture, a very foreign philosophy, a very foreign lifestyle and practice, and so incredibly effectively through his books that, again, my friends were these really tough street kids, really tough New York street kids that were reading Prabhupada's books, understanding it all, and able to communicate it all, right? And being inspired by it all. And able to speak to me and answer all my questions with really solid answers. All my philosophy, because I was searching a bit at this time. And if we want to go back and tell the whole story, which I told last time, we may as well. I'll hit it quick. But I went through a thing where I got in a fight with one kid. I got in a fight with another kid, and that led to me getting stabbed in that fight.
We always want to hear the stabbing story.
Right. So anyway, it was
get stabbed episode.
Yes. So anyway, I it was kind of going around that he and I were gonna go at it, and so we bumped into each other on the street, and literally it was a scene right out of West Side Story or something like that. It was in a graffiti covered dirty alley, in a place called, I don't know if you know where it is. Great Jones Alley?
Yep.
And so it was in Great Jones Alley, And in any case, long story short, he stabbed me twice in this fight. And as that was happening, a friend of mine who was with me pulled me back because I didn't realize it. And like all this blood was like gushing down. You see, I really had to tell at least some more. I was fighting him and I won the fight and I was on top of him. He was begging me to stop and I did. And when I let him up,
Never stop when they beg. That's a lesson there.
This becomes
keep going.
This becomes
Is this the Bhagavatam?
relevant. This becomes relevant because when I let him up, that's when he took out a switchblade, and then we started fighting again. And that's when my friend pulled me back, and I could see just all this blood gushing down my side. And then they took me to the hospital, and I had a lot of time to I had a night in the hospital to think about what just happened, and what to speak of the days following that. And there was something in that made me think about myself and who I was and where I was going, that because the people that I hung around with, my friends, they wouldn't have let him up, right? And there are legends about them doing all kind of things where, they were down to kill, that was like their mood. And at that point, I really had to examine who I was and where I was going. And was I going to become more and more like that myself? Or there was this spiritual thing just kind of stirring up in me? And was I going to become a different kind of person? Or was I going to approach that life? Or was I going to approach a life of a spiritual life? And so, yeah.
If I could jump in, I think this is almost, it may not be your story exactly, but I think everybody's going through this story on their spiritual journey, which is really beautiful to hear it from your mouth and from your vantage point and from your experience. You get to this point where you're like, okay, this is my trajectory. Do I know where I'm going here? This is what it's going to look like. And it's that hiccup that where you get a moment of clarity where you're just going to either go with the current or say, I don't want to become like this. And so this was yours. And it took a knife. For some people, it takes like, I'm getting old. It takes a photo. It takes a loss of a career. For you, it was a knife. But the reality and your choice was the same. Like, I don't want to become this.
Yeah.
And keep going. I just wanted to.
Yeah, well, no, thank you for sharing that. It's important. And even the progression in just my thought from being a young kid into rock and roll to being a young kid into hardcore in this crazy world that I was living in. And at a certain point, my taste in music, it was kind of like going more towards spiritual music. As I started to drift out of hardcore, I was getting into reggae and soul music and just, but also what I was reading, the books I was reading and all that. Politically, I was kind of radical, but my experiences with politically radical people, as a little kid, like as an 11 and 12-year-old, I was reading Communist Manifesto and, all Soul on Night, all these kind of like.
My poor children, they know nothing. I keep them so sheltered on a farm.
I don't think a lot of kids my age are reading those books, but somehow I was into that. And so, but in that world on the Lower East Side, when I got to see that kind of thing, protests and different, the Yippies were right across the street from CBGB's. And as I got to know those kind of people, to be honest, what I hoped to see, I wasn't seeing, like elevated consciousness.
Right.
I was seeing kind of the same anger, just from a different side, the same kind of,
sure.
You could call it anger, hatred, bitterness. I wasn't seeing real answers there. So at this age, at this time, there's a little bit of evolution going on in me on that level. And when I went through that stabbing and I began to think, am I going to become just more brutal in a sense, like all my friends? Or do I want to try to find something spiritual, is there something deeper in life that I'm meant to discover? And ironically, it was from those very friends that really had those. I was reading the Bible. I was dabbling in different philosophies, but it was those friends that really had, more than anyone, had the answers for all my questions, solid, clear answers. And so, yeah.
Sorry for all the budding,
No, no,
but
no.
the magic thing is, it's sort of like
It's the magic
if
thing.
there was like a swami or a saint to mystically appear on the Lower East Side, with where you were at in life, you probably would have listened to them,
Wouldn't have.
but it wouldn't have. But
Yeah.
because it came from a person, a gang member, an incredible musician, a street kid, which is like that's where we were attuned to. This is cool. It's not like we're going to India looking for a sage. We're looking to find ourselves and our niche in this world. And so it's like Krishna tagged people,
Yeah.
especially empowered to speak to you, giving you the same truth a Swami or sage would. When you look at it like that, it's like, what, how clever Krishna is, how clever your higher power is to use these people to feed you, so to speak, to make you what you are today. It's actually so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. It is amazing. So to kind of wrap that story up, it was through those conversations I started to read Srila Prabhupada's books, The Science of Self-Realization, Life Comes from Life, Bhagavad Gita, Sri Ishopanishad. I remember those titles especially somehow. And those books were clicking with me. Everything he was saying was just snapping right into place. Although I didn't feel like I was ready, like my friends, to say, this is me, to put on the Tulsi beads and say, okay, this is me. And then one night in January of 1987, I was walking down I think I was walking down St. Mark's Place or 7th Street or something like that. It was, January was cold and dark, and I ran into my friend Kenny Hess.
Kenny Hess.
And he said, there's a program going at John's place tonight, like a Hare Krishna program going at John's. And John was John Joseph from the Chromax. And he said, you want to go to that? And I was kind of, I don't know.
Now, he was a brahmachari for a while too, Kenny.
Kenny
I
was,
remember.
yeah. Yep.
Was he a brahmachari at that time, or he was just one of your buddies?
No. He was just a friend at that time. It was much later that he became a brahmachari. So I wasn't particularly interested, but then he did mention, well, there's going to be good food there, and we would lived off such meager, allowances. We had so little money. So I was like, you know what, you're right. So for that meal, more than anything, I went there to John's place, which was on Clinton Street, just south of Houston. And when I walked into his apartment, I think he shared that apartment with Crazy Dave at the time, who was another very colorful character.
Crazy Dave? Why would
yeah.
he be colorful with a name like Crazy Dave? Era, you got any Crazy Daves in your life?
And so anyway,
Era's such a civilian.
And so when I walked into that apartment, it was very clean, surprisingly, I remember they had like a little milk cart that had been cut open and they had some flowers in there. It was a very different scene than when normally walking into that apartment. And then Tamal Krishna Goswami walked in. So this was a person that I knew nothing about, sat down with a handful of people. It may have been 6, 7 people in that room with him, right? This was a person that was like a global leader, of a religious movement, right? And he's sitting in this room with a few street kids from the New York hardcore scene. So that was interesting to me.
And incredibly, an incredible intellect, very straightforward, very piercing conversation, a real genuine leader, but like dialed in towards spirit.
Yes. And so he spoke there to that very just small group of us. But I remember walking out of there and saying, this is it. That's it. I cannot not dedicate myself to this now. I didn't know exactly what that looked like, but I said, okay, my doubts are gone. This is what I should dedicate myself to. So within 2 weeks of that time, I began following all the regulative principles of Bhakti-yoga and chanting 16 rounds of japa. I used to live in Williamsburg, Brooklyn at that time. So I used to walk across, to hang out on the Lower East Side, and lived in Williamsburg. So I would chant my rounds walking across the Williamsburg Bridge. And after about 6 months of kind of practicing on my own, following the principles, practicing on my own, of course, with my friends, and going to the Brooklyn Temple, going to the center on Greenwich Avenue, meeting more and more devotees. In September of that month of 87, Gunagrahi Goswami, a monk, senior monk, who was at the time living in the Brooklyn Temple, decided that he was going to travel the country. He invited me to travel with him. And that was it. So going back to Beer's question, I wasn't nervous at all. I was kind of into it. And by that monk providing me a unique way to go about it, hey, let's travel, around the country together. I just jumped on. I left my apartment. I didn't even leave a word with my landlord or anything. I just disappeared. And I was off. And I remember just when Beer asked that question, I remember the day before leaving, sitting on a stoop on St. Mark's Place with Harley Flanagan. And he just said to me, he said, he said, we listen to our stupid music and we, smoke our stupid, herb, we called it at that time mostly. And, and we're just wasting our time. He was like, you're doing the right. He was kind of like, good for you. You're doing the right thing. Go for it. He really gave me that kind of like encouragement. I was already going to do it anyway, but I wasn't nervous. I was ready to get into it.
Very cool. Very cool. Actually, truthfully, it's a little too cool for me to hear that story because my path was filled with so much sort of like, see, I didn't trust those people necessarily. I thought they were cool. I thought their band was cool. I thought they were tough, but I didn't necessarily trust them as friends and spiritual authorities. Matter of fact, for them saying they endorsed it, that was enough for me to say that it must be wrong. Although Harley did many times take me aside and really preach to me, but I still was more like enamored with them as, almost like cult celebrities than
I knew them as friends.
You knew them as friends, as spiritual leaders. So that must have
I didn't
helped.
know them as spiritual leaders.
Well, yeah, but
they were a spiritual influence.
Spiritual insight.
Yeah.
For me, it was sort of like whatever they say, do the opposite of what they say, stuff like that. And because I didn't take drugs and they were all smoking pot, so for me, I was thinking, well, why would these Christian people take drugs? But the idea was that the people that actually strictly followed, they didn't do them. So, but your faith was so.
Even in that time, they weren't doing drugs very much, a little bit, but like they were all trying hard in that period.
It's hard because they're surrounded in a culture of
I'll say this too, is that those are my friends. I had different groups of friends, but those are the friends maybe I hung out with at the most of the time. And I said that my relationship with my parents was kind of rough at the time, but really I have to hand it to them that even though as a teenager, our relationship was very strained.
Your parents?
My relationship with my parents. But the fact that I grew up in a stable household, we weren't like wealthy or anything, but we were very stable household.
It's a lot.
I think it gave me a certain stability to not walk through certain doors that my friends were walking through.
Sure.
And so most of those guys came from all kind of, difficult upbringings too, let's say far less stable. And so I think that helped me a lot.
Yeah. And, I really think those people, despite their hardships or whatever, they get a lot of credit. Both, I think I give them a lot of credit and I think they get a lot of credit from above, so to speak, for inspiring so many people.
That's why I have respect for all of them to this day.
Me too. I have lots of gratitude.
I don't take sides, I have nothing but warm feelings and appreciation for all those guys.
Yeah. But what you said to me, it was almost like it was bothersome, what you just said. It was only bothersome because I juxtaposed it against my own life, where you said, I heard this and then I was fixed. And then I started doing that. And I was like, man, that's all it took? All it took was one little poke? And part of me wants to be sort of like cynical and go, oh, what kind of like blind faith is that? But it's not blind faith with you, Kaustubha. It's just like the puzzle clicked and then I'm in. So I have a question, and it's another question also from Isabel. What keeps you inspired on the Bhakti path? And have you wavered from when you said, no, I'm going to click the opt-in box? Do you waver? Have you wavered? Was there a wavering time of your life? Or were you just like, I will say from what I know of your life, you've always been like, yep, I'm all in. You never like, You didn't even
I-
come up for air. You're just like
I
swimming.
mean,
through.
I waver in different ways in terms of how well I apply it, but my faith has never wavered.
Right.
I've never thought, am I doing the right thing? Not for a moment, actually, since then, honestly.
That's beautiful to hear that. Because I'm having some doubts right now.
Okay, we want to talk?
Can we talk? Martine is writing from France,
Okay.
and she wants to know, how did your parents react?
Well, again, I had already disappointed them severely, and confused them and worried them, on an intense level by being into hardcore and leaving home and, living in gutted out, burnt down, urban blight neighborhoods. And, so it wasn't like it was, I'm sure it was weird for them, but, it was, but I was already very distant from them at that point. So it wasn't like, how am I going to deal with my parents? That wasn't even in the question, I was already doing my own thing and it was already crazy. And you're muted, Raghu.
I'm feeling for your parents right now.
I do too.
As a
I
parent of
apologize. I
teenagers,
have apologized to them.
Have you apologized?
I have.
I feel for parents raising teenagers, because teenagers are self-absorbed, and it's tough because parents ultimately want the best for their kids, but in their eyes, Bhakti, especially becoming a monk, it seems like, what the hell? It's not even like you're a Catholic priest. It's something so foreign that it's like, and who are these people anyway? And I've heard this about them. Poor parents, man. I've changed hats. I'm on the parents team now.
Now that you got teenagers.
Now that I got teenagers, I've changed. Okay, I've got another question for you, my friend. What keeps you inspired? What keeps you going on your path? I mean, a lot of people get into Bhakti. A lot of people, they even take initiation or take vows, but their things start to waver all over the place. What keeps it going for you that, you've been very, very steady? And some of us are on sailboats. We tack north. We go a little south. We tack a little north, tack a little south, right? What makes you feel? I feel like Kaustubha is sort of like, he's like in a speedboat.
I don't know what a speedboat.
What keeps you in that samadhi or that evenness?
Well, I don't claim to be in samadhi or even. I struggle to be even-minded, but I'm inspired, especially, I suppose, by the people that I've met. I've had really great mentors, really great friends, people that have inspired me by their lifestyle, by their words, by their example. And kind of when you develop those relationships, it's kind of like, okay, we're all in this together now. Like, I almost feel like I would be embarrassed, not to be. That's really not the reason. But in other words, when you have those close relationships, you feel like I need to live up to this, to the examples that are being set. And so those important mentors in my life, both for you and I both were, Raghunath Swami, to this day is a huge inspiration. My guru passed away, my initiating guru, Tamal Krishna. I don't think I mentioned that, or maybe I did, that Tamal Krishna Goswami, who I heard from in that class on the Lower East Side, that he became my guru. But he passed away in 2002, so 18 years ago. And even before that time, I was really building a close relationship with Raghunath Swami. And especially after that, I really made it a focus of my life to serve him and hear from him. And so he's a huge inspiration in my life, but there are many,
And if people are standing on the ground, they feel a little stable. It's when you lift that first foot to make your step forward. It's that transition. Like even in a yoga pose, triangle's okay, half moon's okay, but triangle to half moon, in that transition where a lot of the work is done. What was it like in your world? What was it like taking that step? Like, I'm a monk, and you were a monk for how many years?
13 or 14, from 87 to 2000
years. 13 and 14 years. and then all of a sudden, now I'm going to get married. Like, what was that getting back into the world? Was it was it rocky? Was it like, it's weird when you go for 14 years. I'm not going to think about the opposite sex, not going to think about the opposite sex. Now we got blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden you're going to think, okay, that's an option. This is an option. You know, and it's almost like, just tell me who to marry. It's like, how does it work? How did it work for you? I don't want to tell you my like train wreck of a story, but I want to hear your story.
There are different reasons why I decided what we call like changing ashram, right? Going from brahmachari life, which is a student monk life. You can either go from the student monk life into the lifelong monk life, which I think was expected of me by a lot of people.
They're expecting you to go to lifelong monk.
I think, especially after I've been doing it for so long and everything, you know. But I was 33, 34 at the time. And I was thinking, you know, if I'm going to get married, now is the time to do it, right? If I'm going to get married, if I'm going to have kids, I don't want to do this when I'm 40, 45. I should do it now. And, you know, there are different reasons for that. Some I think I could share and people might not understand, and I may not get into. But it had to do with my relationship with my guru and what I felt would be the most, I don't know quite how to phrase it, but what would be the smoothest path in our relationship together.
Huh.
And I think people that know my guru that might be enough to understand. People that won't understand what I'm getting into. But I felt my long-term relationship with him would be better served with myself being a married man than with myself being a monk. Let me put it that way. So that was real important.
He's not telling us all these secrets. I can tell there's more there, but
there's a lot more there. But also some of my closest friends now were married. And I think all that played a role in it. And also, I think if I was going to live as a monk, it would have become a lifelong vow. I really needed the vision of who I'd be doing it with. And it wasn't clear to me at that time. So all these things kind of added up to it. And my guru, who was a very strict monk, and I think a lot of people would assume that he wouldn't be into it. No, he kind of completely blessed the idea. And I remember you were saying maybe it's awkward sometimes. It was only awkward right when I was trying to make the decision, what am I going to do? And at that time, I remember saying to him, and this is advice that I'll never forget. This is real important to me. I remember it to this day. I was saying to him, it seems like both paths are a little dark right now. And he said, not at all. Both paths are very bright. Either you stay a monk and you follow this line and you'll be happy, and, you know, or you get married and you get married to a great girl and and that'll, you know, he didn't even entertain it. But you know, sometimes when a person speaks from a place of realization and conviction, that just their conviction is enough to kind of like convince you. And the way that he said it, no, both paths are bright, you know. And he also said, and I'll never forget this too. And because I met him at the time, he had gone back to college. He was like in graduate studies at Cambridge University in England. And so I was visiting him there. And then he said, so what do you think you're going to do? And I said, well, you know, I'm not really sure. At that time, I was going to India and I was going to be there for a few months. So I'm like, well, you know, I'm going to India and I'll be there for a few months. So, you know, I'll have time to think about it. And then he said this to me, and, you know, you know him and people that know him, he was
like a lightning bolt.
Yeah. He wasn't like one of these passive kind of, you know, people, you know, he was confronting.
20 gauge.
Yeah. And so he said to me, he said to me,
spiritual truth.
But you know, like in a calm way, but like he said, Kaustubha, everything that you need to know to make this decision, you already know, right? It's not that you need to go to India and think about it for 3 months. You need to add up, you know, the pros and the cons and be decisive and make a decision. And by the time you leave here in 3 days, you should know what you're going to do. And
you too, Vera. You have 3 days to figure out your life.
And so
you already know everything.
Yeah. And so that made a lot of sense to me. Actually, I knew he was totally right, you know? And so I made my decision there. And then I walked through that door, and sometimes you do that in life. You walk through the door and you know, there's no turning back. And I did that. And so you were asking what the change was like. It was actually, for me, it felt it felt good, it felt good. I didn't know who I was going to marry. I just know, okay, I'm going to get married.
Isn't that
And
funny, Kaustubha, as far as like cultural, like just to
yeah,
observe this with the culture? Because you say to people like, you've been a monk for a long time, and then all of a sudden you take off your orange robes, you put on your white robes, and then you go up to someone, you say, yeah, you change colors of your robes. What does that mean? He goes, well, I'm getting married. Oh, really? Who are you marrying? I don't know. Anybody.
anyway, I wasn't anybody, but yeah.
He married anybody. Anybody will do.
Well, the thing was, and this is now I should speak a little bit about my wife, right? Because at that point, as soon as people heard that I was getting married, quite a few people, some of my mentors, some of my friends, they were like, oh, we know the person for you. We know the person for you. And that was Gitapriya, who turned out to be my wife. And so they were right. And, so I got to know her, which was, nothing but a pleasure. And we've been together since then. So I think within a couple months after I left the monk life, I met her, and we've been together since. And she's, and really people say I'm steady or this or that. So much of what I do in my life, I really have to share the credit with my wife, Gitapriya. She's
Pretty incredible.
She's a great friend. She's in one way, she's a simple person, right? But I think she's a deeply realized person, and she's got just always a sweet disposition. She's always absorbing herself in spiritual consciousness. She's really works hard and serves hard, and just always pleasant for me to be around, and always, just a great friend and companion.
We, me and my daughter went to visit Kaustubha and his wife the other day on a very, very hot day in New York City.
Yeah,
So
the hottest day.
Me and my daughter, you know me, she's my daughter. And so we're sort of like, and Kaustubha's, the Addams Family song, if you're familiar with the Addams Family, I call Kaustubha the Sutvic family. So when he's very Sutvic, everything's calm. It is like 140 degrees in his apartment. Like you're like at Govardhan Hill in the summer. And Kaustubha's very calm, rocking in his chair. I was like, walking around. And then his wife is very calm. Welcome. Can I get you some lunch? She brings out, me and my daughter sitting there. We just walked in. We're exhausted. We're throwing our stuff everywhere. Everything is perfectly organized in like an 800 square foot apartment. If that was my apartment, everything would be everywhere. Stuff would be shoved in every corner, things shoved under the bed. Me and my daughter sit there like the most perfect meal, perfectly there's like the perfect amount of vegetables and subsies and rice in a perfect order. Me and my daughter are like, what's just happening? Like this is served to us incredibly nicely. Kaustubha's sitting there rocking, and then let me get you some more. Would you like some more? She's serving us out, and then she goes up. Actually, before she served this out, she's like, lunch is almost prepared. I'm just offering it to the deities. Like, basically, their altar takes up a third of their apartment. They just open up these massive curtains like they're opening like a stage performance. And it's like, Radha Krishna, Gauranitai. And all the food comes onto the altar. And then she starts worshiping the deities. As a matter of fact, when we first got there, my daughter's like, what's this gigantic bookcase? And I was like, that's the altar. That's the altar. And my daughter's like, oh, I want to see the altar. Let us see the altar. And Gitapriya was like, the deities are resting now. I'm like, oh my God, the deities are resting. Oh, the deities are resting. We can't see the deities now. They're resting. And she has a very intimate relationship with these deities. And then so finally now we can see the deities, and she starts worshiping the deities and doing a beautiful puja. And my daughter looks at me. She goes, after watching Gitapriya, I think we got to up our deity worship game.
I mean, that's how I feel. I feel like I got to up my game when I'm around her. So it's.
And I think that's a big thing in our whole, what we're trying to do here with Wisdom of the Sages. It was almost unintentional and intentional, because it's basic foundation of our philosophy is we want to be surrounded with people who make us want to up our spiritual game.
Yeah.
Because culture is dropping that bar real low in Kali Yuga. The bar is dropped. And we're trying to raise the bar, and it's hard because culture's telling us, big deal. Don't you try it too hard. So it's good to have people in your life. I love having you in my life. Love having Mara in
Feel
my
the
life.
same.
And I love having this whole community in my life. I feel like they're raising the bar on me, and it's
They
helping
are.
me become a better person. And I'm super grateful. Um, you got time for one more, brother? I think we
I
got a
got
little
time
bit.
for as many as you got.
All right. You're intimately connected with the Bhakti Center. Now, people go to the Bhakti Center now. It's like it's sharp, it's attractive, it's cool. There's beautiful people waiting for you at the door. Um, we've had people, a lot of our listeners goes there on a regular basis.
Hmm.
They're impressed with it, but it wasn't always like that. Can you tell us why you're dedicated to the Bhakti Center, what it means to you? The day of the life of Kaustubha with the Bhakti Center, you're like
Hmm.
an integral part of the Bhakti Center there. You want to share a little bit about this mission? I call it a mission, really. You're
Well,
offering.
it was interesting. A few years back, I stayed with a friend of mine, Tara, and Tara Das. We were monks together. He lives in Mayapur, this holy place in Bengal. It's like a key, one of the most important spiritual places for us. And we go back many years together. So I was visiting him there. We hadn't seen each other in about 9 years, but he's a very close, someone I love very much, a very close friend of mine. And I was staying with his family there, and we realized that when he first became a monk, he had this desire. I want to live in Mayapur. And I remember that even before I became a monk, I was thinking, someday I want to serve here on the Lower East Side. This is where I founded, and I have this connection with this neighborhood, and I want to serve here. And we realized Krishna fulfilled both of our desires, right? He was living in Mayapur, and I was serving on the Lower East Side. And when I after I got married, I very shortly thereafter I moved back to New York City. And as soon as I moved back to New York City, my guru had passed away. And I was beginning to connect with Raghunath Swami. So in the summer of 2000, and I'm going to tell my own history with the Bhakti Center, and this is how I see it, and other people see it in other ways. But I was thinking, how can I serve here? And I had a year there to look at it, and it was I began to come up with different ideas, and it was the night of the Rath Yatra in New York in June of 2003. I wanted to speak with Raghunath Swami about it. He was about to leave town, and he said, "Come see me tonight." And he was staying at this little ashram, little brahmachari, little monk ashram on 4th Street, on East 4th Street. And so I visited him there, and I said, because you see, my guru was training me day by day, testing me. Like, this is what he used to do with me. He used to ask me hard questions, right? He used to say to me, like, and he had this super sharp intelligence, but he would ask me questions like, what do you think about what this monk is doing over here in the program that they got, or these devotees are doing in this city and how they're presenting bhakti? What do you think about it? And, I think the way that, like, many of us were kind of like brought up, I'm saying within the Hare Krishna movement, it would always be like, oh, it's great what they're doing. Yeah. He wouldn't tolerate, like, if you were going to give an answer, he would ask you to explain why. And if your answer wasn't strong, he would pick it apart in front of you and make you look like an idiot, right? That was part of his expertise. So he made you think. And I think day after day, he was training me to think, like, how can this bhakti, movement and practice, how can it become relevant to people today?
Critical thinking.
Yeah.
Critical thinking, not just yes, being nice. Yes, 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 whatever you say.
Yeah. So when I was back in New York, and I wasn't a monk now, and I kind of had a certain level of independence, what am I going to do with my life? And I was examining it, and then he passed away as soon as I got here. So I really felt his presence in a new way in my life. I felt like he was preparing me for something, and I meant to try to carry that out here in New York City is the ideal place to do it. And so I approached Raghunath Swami at that time, and I said, maybe we could try to start some kind of cultural center, and it was really that vision of, one floor there's a kirtan going on, another floor someone's studying Bhagavad Gita, another floor there's a restaurant, we were talking like that, the two of us. And he really encouraged me. But it was at that point that a group of people that were connected to him, you being one of them, the brahmacharis in that ashram being some of them, people like Yogi True, people like Gauravani Prabhu, people like Ananta Achyuta, people like Yogeshwar Prabhu, people, like there's a group of people around him that were all, he had no official role in New York City, but he was just an inspiration to the people there. And I think seeing how he dealt with people and seeing his mood and so on, there's kind of a group of satellites around him. And it was all working towards something. And eventually that became the Bhakti Center. And so from that point, 2003, I said, well, what's the next step? And he told me, you should learn to become a yoga teacher like asana, which I had never really done. And that goes to the story that I was telling last week, where I walked into Broome Street Temple and we began that. But that was the beginning of the Bhakti Center. And some years passed until we got the building. And even after we got the building, there's a lot of struggle. There's some real years of difficulty, personal relationships, financial difficulties there, and so much. But step by step, so many people have contributed to that project in different ways. To me, right from the very beginning, I've been there with it, and I consider it really part of my life. And I see it's like, you want to do something with your life. You want to try to, I guess, make a mark in some way. I don't know if that's really the right way to phrase it, but
sure. Your contribution.
It's inspired by my guru. I want to try to make a contribution and be part of something like that. And so the Bhakti Center, to me, Wisdom of the Sages is like that for me. And the Bhakti Center is like that. And I really hope and envision that can be a place that where people can come together in a real progressive way, try to understand how to present this to the world and how people of the world can experience it in a great and transforming way. And that may carry on and influence other places. So I've played all different kind of roles there. And in one sense, since Wisdom of the Sages has become what it is, I'm less hands-on there, but I'm still, my heart and soul are with it. I'm a member of the board of directors there. I'm involved in helping develop some of the education there and just helping people in different ways there. So, I love the Bhakti Center. I love all the devotees that have contributed to making it what it is. And there's been many.
Prabhuji, if I could just share a observance, is that, and I think this is sort of like an ongoing theme, is like, okay, what's helping you stay steady in Bhakti? Because we all want to be steady in Bhakti. And what I've seen is that, and I've seen it, people get into Bhakti, but they try to figure out what, what does that mean for me? Am I a congregational member, or is it just, but you chose I want to render I want to contribute. And that's been on your mind. How can I contribute to this greater good? And it's that bigger picture. I mean, materialists say this in you need a mission, you need to find your purpose. And I feel like in a spiritual paradigm, we need to find our purpose. What is our contribution? Or am I just trying to have a happy life, trying to have a comfortable life? And if that's your thing, you might be comfortable. But I don't think they're going to fulfill that burning desire in the heart and to really even satisfy me, because we find our worth from our contribution. And I feel like you've always been contribution focused. And I think that assists you in your steadiness in Bhakti. What is my offering now? Is it just just want to make a living and survive and live it, have some time to go on vacation? Is that thinking like that? And truthfully, all those other things are taken care of anyway. You get to go on a vacation. You get to go to India, or it's not like you've been cheated yourself out of a full life experience. You've had a full life. You've had a great life, but the idea is the underlying current in your choices have been is, what can I contribute now? And I feel like that's a good lesson for all of us, is what is my contribution in my spiritual life? And when we go on, Prabhu.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think both you and I were trained in Bhakti to think that way. That's what it was all about. It's what can I contribute? And even though I may not be so deep and clear in my consciousness, my mind might waver and be distracted by this and attracted by that. And I don't consider myself a great yogi, for sure. Let me be very honest about that, right? When I sit down to chant japa and do my meditation, my mind is still an uncontrolled thing, But we were trained that, but what we can do, I may not be able to completely control my mind, but what I can do is make a contribution, dedicate my time, my energy. That we can do. And you're a huge inspiration to me with that, Raghunath. And, you know, you're a person I see that, you know, you had the opportunity to, you know, be a rock star or, do a lot of things that a lot of people may fantasize about or dream about.
It's a tough job, but somebody had to do it.
Okay. But you had no, you had no attachment to it. You would use it if it could be used, and you would drop it if that would be helpful. What would be helpful for making the contribution? That became your thing, and to this day, you've never stopped. You keep going. So I want to thank you, Raghunath, officially in this interview. That you're a huge inspiration to me. You're a great friend, and it's a great joy to me that that our like somehow we both were trying to make the same kind of contribution, and that although we've been friends all these years, that in this we've been able to really connect and serve together. It's these are you know what keeps me inspired? Having friends like you keeps me inspired. You know, being able to serve with people like you, it keeps me always inspired. You know
What?
Yeah.
Bravo.
You.
Prabhu, that was so sweet. Thank you for sharing so much. And if you have any more questions about Kaustubha's story, just write them into Mara. I'll re-ask them any old time.
Let me do one more thing.
Please.
I want to thank Mara too. You know, I really have to thank Mara that people don't know how much she does behind the scenes, but in order to do what we do, there wouldn't be any time. It's like, it's a lot of stuff to do. And she's just got the ultimate service attitude, dedicated time. You know, it's like Mara.
Kaustubha, she brought me pie yesterday.
I know.
She brought me pie.
Because you subtly
and I subtly
your affection for it. But that's the emotional attitude, right?
With pie.
He likes pie. Let me figure out how to get some pie over there. You know, it's like Mara really does a lot, so I got to thank her a lot. Thank you.
Super grateful for this community, Kaustubha. Thank you for your friendship and your inspiration.
Thank you.
What a wonderful day. I'm convinced today's going to be a great day. You know that? I've got a plumbing that doesn't work. I've got a bunch of students here trying to go to the bathroom and wash their hands. We're trying to figure it out. You know what? That's part of the path. The part of the path is you're going to get some obstacles in your way. You know what you got to do? You just got to keep going down that path. Christian will figure it out for you. Stay on your path, everybody. It gets sweeter and sweeter and sweeter, and even the tough times become very sweet in Bhakti. That is the beautiful thing. Thanks for showing us your life and your example of being vulnerable, Kaustubha. Thanks for everybody for joining us. Thanks for all the Zoomers I didn't say hello to. Jeff Eisenberg. Who else we got here? Eric Noble, my man. Danielle Benson, the Indian pilgrim. Urugaya Damanar Priya, who's here. Damanar Priya, what an asset she is to this teacher training. We love her. Chris, welcome. Greg DeGesu, welcome. And now is the time to sing and dance. Here